I think I broke
Unlike
a fiddle
Uncle
player.
Bonsai, we don't have to pay for this by the inch.
Yes. They have a live recording where they mention that.
Well, here we go. Circe. Now I've decided that 2 videos is enough. I wasn't sure before whether this was going to be 2 or maybe 3 videos, but I think 2 is going to cover it. So let's get through Circe. This is the tough one. All right, if you make it through Circe, from here out, it's smooth sailing. All right, so let's wrap this up. Now, where we left off is we got into the brothel of Bellicoin. We are now inside that brothel. Now, this chapter, as we said before, is a chapter of hallucination. Most of the stuff that's described obviously doesn't take place. Bloom doesn't turn into a pig, though he is a pig in a metaphorical sense. So we're dealing with the deepest psyche of Bloom and the innermost guilts. All right, so we have to really keep that in mind. Now, in the first part, we saw some of Bloom's guilts as he makes his way to the brothel of Bellicoin, trying to find Stephen. In this episode, we'll see Bloom go through this cycle of humiliation. We see great distortion. We see real ugliness. And then all hell breaks loose. And then we have a climactic event. Okay, I don't want to wreck it now. This is about humiliation, guilt, reflection, and when you face it, what are you going to do about it? It's there. It's in the deepest, most psyche. This is the part of our brain that we don't want to deal with. All right, so Bloom is getting all this stuff, is all coming up, and he's going to have to face it and deal with it, and let's see how he comes out. So we're in the brothel of Bellicoin. Bloom has pursued Stephen there, and Stephen is there with Lynch. Stephen is still drinking. He's at this point, he's bombed out of his brain. He's incoherent. He's passing out money to the prostitutes, not really following through with anything. He plays the piano for a while. He makes some speeches, passes out money kind of crazily, pontificates, and by the near end of the chapter, he picks up his ash plant, his walking stick, and he calls it Nortung, which is from Wagner's opera. It's about the sword. He lifts the ash plant, declares Nortung, and he swings it, breaking the chandelier. Glass flies, and Bellicoin calls for the police. Stephen panics and runs out the door. That's what transpires. Now let's take a look at this. Remember that Bloom has surrendered his potato. The potato is his lucky talisman. It was from his mother. It's old black potato now, and he's given that up, and so he is defenseless in the realm of Circe, and he must endure the humiliation and the changing into a pig. He's got to deal with that and other humiliations in this process, in this venue. the first thing to come out is not having the potato, for Bloom is emasculating. He has lost his power. That potato, remember from the Odyssey, is his protection given by Hermes against Circe. He is defenseless. So as he is operating in this realm of Circe, Bloom is emasculated. He is powerless. And the first accusation, if you will, against him is that he is womanly. He is effeminate. Now, Buck Mulligan has made the charge of pederasty against Bloom, that he's after Stephen because he has some leering sexual interest, which we know is not true. Mulligan's just a lowbrow cat anyway. But that's the first accusation against Bloom, is that he is not masculine. He lacks manliness. Now, everything in this episode is wildly exaggerated. Now, we've dealt with the parodist, where things were exaggerated. In this case, the exaggerations are blown out, not in parody, not meant to amuse us or make you chuckle, though there are a few lines in here which I think are rather funny, but he's not intending us to get a laugh out of it. The exaggerations are to take us to hell and back, and that's where we're going to go in this episode. All hell breaks loose. So the first accusation against Bloom is that he is not manly. Now, as we think about Bloom, we look through the day with Bloom. He always is compassionate toward people. He cares about other people, and in this sort of dreary, macho, drunken society, that's not manly. So Bloom is considered he's the butt of many of the jokes. He's a effeminate character, but we know that is his compassion. All right, so Bloom is a pacifist, like Stephen is a pacifist. He's not one to fight or have violence. Now, if we think about this, they make the accusation of Bloom being effeminate. He's a woman. Think about Bloom in a sort of female role earlier in the book. Now, when we first run into him in Calypso, what's he doing? He's serving Molly. Molly is in bed, and he makes breakfast, and he serves her, which is the traditional role of the wife. So we see Bloom playing the part of the woman early in this book. There is a reference in this chapter that Bloom played a woman in a high school play. So this idea of Bloom playing a woman is not new. This is a concept which somewhat permeates the book. Now, Joyce is thought to have considered sexuality to be theater. It's all about costume, dress up, role play, acting. So he sees sex as a theatrical kind of act. And so this whole situation in the brothel is written in the form of a play with stage direction and dialogue. So we're told the characters are to do this, and they take up this position, and this happens, and then they speak these lines. So as you read this, think of it in terms of a play, that it's being manipulated by the playwright. It's not in a novel form. We've moved, each episode has a sort of different format. This one is in the form of a play, and so the stage direction is particularly important. Now, Bloom suffers his humiliation and taunting at the hands of Bella Cohen. Now, keep in mind, Bella Cohen, rather interestingly, we have a Jewish name here, so there's something there, something to be said about that. What it is exactly, I don't know. I don't want to go there right now in these videos, but I think there is something to be said about the undercurrent of anti-Semitism in this turn-of-the-century Dublin society, and that, we have the Jewish guy as the moneylender, we have the Jewish guy as the merchant who wants his money, and he gets screwed in court because the guy pleads that he has no money that's owed, and so the Jewish guy gets cheated out of his tea and sugar. So we see the Jewish character as the butt of the jokes, in league with the Masons, as the money lenders, the merchants controlling the economy, and now we see the Jew again in the seedy control of this business. So, this is kind of the ugly, stereotypical anti-Semitic view of the Jew. So here we go again, right? We've got Bella Cohen as the mistress of this brothel. Bella Cohen turns manly, becomes bellow, and demands that Bloom submit. And Bloom takes the submissive role. He kneels down to tie the shoe, and as she lifts, or he, we get this morphic kind of picture here, but Bella Cohen turns to Bella Cohen and lifts a hoof, which Bloom goes to. He was going to originally tie the shoe, and he kisses the hoof. It gets pretty gross, some of this stuff. Now, just don't forget, we're deep in the weird subconscious. If you've ever had a nightmare or a bizarre dream, things just go weird in the brain. And that's what Joyce is trying to give us here, is that the wheels are just flying off. All right. So we're not only in the darkest part of the subconscious, or the darkest part of the mind, but we're also in hell, in a vision of hell. Look at some old paintings of hell, with the stuff that's going on with tormentors and all the people that are there doing stuff to each other, sort of a Dante-esque view of hell. That's what we have here. Pretty gross scene. Now, even Boylan shows up. Boylan makes an appearance, and Bloom submits to him, and Boylan gives him permission to watch him engage with Molly through the keyhole. And, he tells him, you can look through the keyhole and pleasure yourself as I entertain your wife. And Bloom he's excited about that. And he asks if he could take pictures. I mean, he's that surrendered to the ugliness of this situation. I don't think in anything I've ever read that there's an uglier, more hellish chapter in real literature. I'm sure that somebody somewhere has written something grosser, but in true literary pieces, I don't think there's anything darker than this chapter. We get appearances of many of the characters in the book. We get the friends make appearances. We get Daisy makes an appearance. They all show up. Menton, the lawyer, shows up. They all come through this thing. Of course, Boylan, the two barmaids are there, bronze and gold. They make their appearance. Stephen's mother shows up. They're all there. Buck Mulligan shows up. Everybody makes an appearance in this chapter, which tells us something, that it's sort of many are called but few are chosen, or the gate is wide, and the gate that goes to destruction is wide, and the gate that goes to salvation is narrow, and few make it. It's like the whole cast of characters is in this hell, and they're you don't see saints and angels flying around here. We've got the whole cast of characters showing up in this hell scene, and they're all distorted and grotesque. Now, I think of this chapter as like, when you invite a friend to your house for Thanksgiving, right? You have a single friend and you invite them to be with the family on Thanksgiving. and Dad gets a few beers in him and says weird stuff, and you got crazy Aunt Harriet, and it's like you bring your friend over, and the food's great, Mom's gracious and courteous, and your sister's swell, and that part's great, but then Dad gets a few belts and he's off the rails, and then crazy Aunt Harriet is pontificating on weird stuff, and I guess the modern equivalent would be maybe a political discussion and fight breaks out. That's a bit how I feel about this chapter. I love for people to read this book, and I love to introduce people to this book, and when you get to Circe, they say, geez, this is nuts, this is wacky, I can barely understand it, plus what I can understand is a weird, twisted, it's like, kind of embarrassed. You want to say, like, skip it and just go on, but it's necessary. You have to go through it. You want to understand the whole thing, you got to go through this chapter, right? So it's always, for me, this is a difficult one. There's a degree of, like, embarrassment here, slancha. But we got to do it. So this is the family Thanksgiving right here, this chapter. So as we go through, we see Bloom is turned into a pig, as Circe does the men in the Odyssey. Circe, because Bloom is without the potato, exerts her power over him, and he does grovel and become the pig. But as we get deeper and deeper and deeper into this stuff, and I think you'll see it with that much insight, you'll figure it out. Bloom begins to turn, like he's been through all this stuff, and he begins to turn. He asks for the potato back from Zoe, and she kind of messes around with him, and he gets it. He tells her it was from his mother, and his mother's gone. And Zoe seems to be a kind of decent person. She doesn't have, in my view, she doesn't have the wickedness of some of these other characters in this chapter. And she gives it back to him. Now, once he gets it, there is an immediate change. He's keeping an eye on Stephen. He's dealing with Bella Cohen. She is dealing with him in a different way. You can see from the moment he gets that potato back that there is a change. We see Bloom get more powerful, and we see the others begin to refer to him differently. Now, as I said, Stephen gets wound up. He's playing the piano, and he kind of gets wound up. He makes a speech about something and raises his ash plant, swings it, and he breaks the chandelier. Glass comes raining down, and that really freaks him out. Bella Cohen erupts and starts calling for the police. The prostitutes in the place start trying to bar the door. It's like things really break loose at this point. Stephen gets out the door, leaves his stick behind. He and Lynch get out the door, and they run down the street. And they're bombed out of their brains, so they don't get far, but they do run out of the place. Bella Cohen is screaming about her broken chandelier. She wants 10 shillings for it, and Bloom now is a different guy. He's got his potato back. He's dealt with all this stuff, and now he stands up to her and says, "No, look." And he raises the ash plant, and she cowers. She cowers and says, "No, don't do it." And he says, "No, and just to show you what happened." He's just trying to poke under it and show her. It's very interesting because this is a real close parallel to the Odyssey in that sense. That what does Odysseus do? He raises his sword to Circe, and then she, asks for mercy, and then they end up hooking up. So Bloom raises the ash plant, and she cowers, and then he's no, it's okay. I just want to show you. And then he explains that just the chimney on the gas lamp is broken, that the chandelier is okay. The only part that broke is the part that encloses the gas flame. It's a small part. You just lift it on. The chandelier itself is fine. He pulls the chain, it lights right up, and he says, see, it's fine, it's working great, it's not a problem. And, she still puts up a bit of an argument. She wants more money, basically. And he says, look, it's a simple part, this will more than cover it. He throws a shilling on the table, and he tells her that, Stephen is, he's a medical student, he's the nephew of the vice chancellor, pays your rent. This is where all the business comes from, right? These medical students. So better not to get too upset with these guys. Better let this go, because if it gets back to the school decides to, prohibit the medical students from going there or raising a stink with the police. Either her place is going to get shut down, or the students will be barred from going there, subject to being thrown out of school or something. Anyway, it's not going to be good for business, so better to cool it. So Bloom not only is strong, as we see symbolically in the lifting of the ash plant, but he also is very cogent. He knows what he's doing. He makes her a very rational argument, and Bloom's got all his faculty. Bloom now really has it together. Unlike his earlier episodes with Confrontation, where he flees, he runs from the biscuit box tossed at him by the citizen, Bloom now is in charge. He's a different guy. He's got much more strength than he's had in earlier episodes. Okay, so he puts a showing on the table, bolts through the door past the other prostitutes, and he's out to find Stephen. Now, as Bloom goes, it's like all hell is chasing him. There's a description, it's somewhat humorous, but gross. They throw it old cabbage, codfish, gravel, and biscuit tins, all this crap they throw at him. And, of course, nothing hits him. And then they're all after him. The citizen is after him. The hounds are after him. The hounds of hell are after him. You can see picture in your mind these ghouls just going for him. But they don't catch him. They just go after him. But now at this point, all hell is broken loose. All right, Stephen has flown the coop. Bloom has stood up to Circe. And now all the rules are suspended. But Bloom gets away. He reaches Stephen, and Stephen is in this exchange with these two British privates. They're arguing about Sissy Caffrey. Supposedly Bloom has insulted her. The private car says that, you insult her, I'll punch you. How would you like it if I broke your jaw? And Stephen sort of cracks wise, and well, that wouldn't be any fun. And they sort of get in this exchange, which eventually rolls around to an insult of the king, who shows up in the hallucination. We get King Edward. He appears and sucking on a juju. We get the Crappie Boy shows up, and remember, all the hounds of hell and all these characters are coming, that they're behind Bloom. And then they sing, what was earlier London's Burning. Remember, Bloom was singing London's Burning, London's Burning. Now it's Dublin. Dublin's burning, Dublin's burning. And it's all ugly. We're reaching this climax. Stephen is in an exchange with the privates. The guy feels he's insulted the king. Stephen makes a line here. I wanted to read you. He's tapping his head. Stephen says, "It is here that I must kill the priest and the king." Now, to us, and some commentators say it's not so obvious to us. I think to us, by this point, it is fairly obvious that Stephen is trying to overcome the early usurpers from that first chapter, that first thing we talked about at the very beginning. The church and Britain are the usurpers. And Stephen is saying in his mind, this is where you must win the battle. You must break yourself free in your head from the oppression of the church and the oppression of the English. Well, Private Car takes that as a huge insult to the king. Here it comes. Wham. He gives Stephen a pop in the jaw. Boom, Stephen's out cold. Bloom then deals with Corny Kelleher. Sorry. So Corny Kelleher is a police informant. He works with the police. They know who he is. He happens to show up. He's on a carriage, a cab, and he shows up. Bloom sees him. He says, "Hey, this Simon Daedalus's kid over there. He's had a bit to drink. Can you help me out?" And Corny Kelleher. Now again, this is unusual because normally Bloom is kind of blown off. He immediately understands the situation. He goes to work with the police, tells the police, "Look, the guy's he won some money at the races today. He's out celebrating, got away from himself." The police are like, "Yeah, I get it. They know what's going on." The British soldiers decide they better hightail it out of there, so they take off. And because of Bloom's intervention, there are no consequences to Stephen. He's not dragged off to the pokey for public intoxication. He's not beat up by the British. It just sort of levels out. And this situation of hell begins to wind down. We see Lynch, who has been with Stephen for most of the drinking and was there at Bella Cohen's. Lynch grabs a girl and takes off, and they call him the Judas, as he departs. So we get it all. This is meant to be a real, in the description of the crucifixion, it's like at that time of crucifixion, all hell breaks loose. There's celebration in hell that the Satan is celebrating, the demons are celebrating. There's an earthquake, and the veil in the temple is rent, and it's like everything just kind of breaks. And that's what's happening here. We have Judas, and then we have all hell breaking loose, and Dublin is burning. And then Bloom steps in and takes command. And as he takes command, it all begins to settle down. So the police depart. The crowd is dispersed. Bloom tells them to move on. Corny Kelleher supports that, and the crowd is dispersed. The police leave. The British soldiers depart, and things quiet down. Now, once they quiet down, once things start to quiet down, Bloom is over Stephen. He dusts him off, says that he cleans off the sawdust and stuff, probably from the floor of Bella Cohen, and then plus the, whatever's on the street there. And Bloom sort of cleans him off. And Stephen starts to recite something, and Bloom can't quite catch it. There's something there about Fergus, and Bloom is trying to hear him, and he tries to wake him up, and he tells him, let's go home. And Stephen's like out of it. He's drunk. He's been punched right in the face. He's not there, and he's sort of mumbling. Bloom doesn't really understand what he's talking about, and he looks up and he looks away from Stephen. It's very important that he looks away from Stephen, and he sees a young boy in an Eton suit reading backwards. Okay, but backwards for us. He's reading backwards. So he is the Jewish scholar, this little boy. So we wonder, what would have been of Rudy? And here is this incarnation of Rudy. Now, does Bloom break? Does he snap? Does he fall apart? No. He sees it. This incarnation doesn't wreck him as these previous incarnations have. He sees it. He sees this boy. He thinks of Rudy. And we get a sort of fulfillment, because throughout the book, it's like what would have been. Remember when Bloom thinks about that, he wonders if he would have been to Eton and how he would have looked in this suit, and what would have become of him, and what their relationship would have been like. And now we see that fulfillment in Here's Rudy. He's in his Eton coat and he's studying his Torah like a good little boy. So we see not another hell character. There's nothing running out of his nose or mouth. He's not spewing bile. There's nothing. He's just a nice image. We see the end of this hellish. And I believe that that is a moment of resolution. That in seeing Rudy, Bloom is going to be okay. Joyce is telling us that he is resolved on that issue. Remember, this is the core of everything. The loss of Rudy is what fractured his relationship with Molly. And this is a peaceful view. Now, Stephen's there passed out, with junk all over him. But what Bloom sees is Rudy. He's not looking at Stephen as, there's my son. If I can just put Humpty back together again, I'll have the son I always wanted. That's not what we get here. We get Bloom reaching that recapitulation. He's going to be okay. We get, from all these visions of hell, we finally get something positive. We get an apparition that's not evil. Returning his attention back to Stephen, and he looks down and the chapter ends rather, mysteriously. So what happens? Where does it go? What's next? Does Bloom find a son in Stephen? Do they bond? Do they go off and have coffee and get to know each other and become lifelong pals? We'll see. The main thing is that the takeaway here is that Bloom is okay. We don't know about Stephen. I don't know how that's going to go with him. We'll find out later. We'll get an idea anyway. But Bloom is going to be okay. He's gone through it. He's faced it all. Bloom has faced it all in this episode. And he's going to be okay. So, this is a rough one. Like I always say, take it slow. Pay attention to what's going on, even though it's pretty ugly. Now, when we come out of this episode and get into the next one's like a real break for the reader. It's a rest. It's pretty easy to tell what's going on, and it's a fairly simple read, but there's a lot there, as usual with Joyce. But we need a rest, and he knows it. We've been through it. It's been a long day. If you've been reading this book for 9 months, you're probably as fatigued as Bloom. His day started early, and he went off to the butcher to buy stuff to cook the kidney, to go to the funeral. He's had a long day, and he's tried to help the widow. He's had the little event on the beach. He's been thrown stuff at by the citizen. It's been a long day. We're now past midnight. We're into the next day, and it's been a rough one, and it's been hard on the reader. And this episode is very, very strenuous for the reader. So if you feel like you're about to lose it, from here out, it's pretty easy stuff. So you've made it. Congratulations. You've done it. Slancha. You've made it through by far the toughest stuff. So Circe is a rough chapter. Take it easy. Study it. Get to know it. Allow that grossness to reach you so that you can see the vision of hell that Joyce wants us to see and come out of it okay. So congratulations. You've done great. Now we have to see what happens. Bloom and Stephen, where does it go from here? Well, let's find out. I admire you for sticking it out. You've done great. Thank you. Leave me some comments if you would. Thumbs up if you feel like it. And I'll see you in the next episode. And for this one, a big sláinte.